They said the age of projectiles ended 1,000 years ago. No one threw, launched, or fired anything anymore. They guided it. Every weapon in the galaxy was smart, self-correcting, and polite enough to ask for permission before it killed. Violence had become an algorithm. That's why the assignment was supposed to be a joke, a class project, a nostalgic tribute to the past. Build a primitive ranged weapon, the professor had said. No plasma, no gravity fields, just physics. The room glowed with elegant prototypes. Energy bows hummed with refracted light. Dart launchers levitated ammunition on coils of magnetized air. One group had even created a harmonic resonance cannon that used sound to displace matter. Everything shimmered. Everything was quiet, calibrated, beautiful. And then the human walked in, carrying a stick, a strip of rubber, and a pouch of metal bearings. His name was Daniel Ward, Earth-born, transfer cadet. He didn't walk with bravado or wear his weapon like a statement. He carried it like a tool casually, like a thing meant to be used, not displayed. He took a seat near the back, placed his weapon gently on the table, and began adjusting the bands. No glow, no hum. Just wood, tension, and intent. Professor Zeltor, skeletal, chitin-framed, and respected in every combat science division across the core systems, turned toward the new arrival with a diplomatic smile. "Cadet Ward," he said, with exaggerated civility. "I trust this. Arrangement is your contribution?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Professor." The professor tilted his narrow head. "And what might we call this masterpiece of primitive mechanics?" "A slingshot," Daniel replied. Snickering rippled through the room. A Lurnari cadet leaned to his neighbor and whispered, "He brought a child's toy." The professor, to his credit, maintained a veneer of academic neutrality. "Charming," he said. "And does this slingshot have predictive tracking?" "No." "A stabilizing base plate?" "No, sir." "Homing capability?" Daniel shook his head once. "Just hands." The murmurs grew louder. Professor Zeltor's voice sharpened slightly. "You intend to hit a target at range using elastic recoil and mass alone?" Daniel's response was simple. "Yes. I have innate it." "You believe this design will achieve the assignment's objectives?" Daniel smiled, not wide, not smug, just certain. "I believe it will hit what I aim at. All why I mead from the Baster." The mockery began in earnest during the break between lectures. Cadets from 3 species surrounded Daniel's workstation, their own gleaming prototypes displayed like trophies. One of them, a Zirconian with jointed arms and crystalline skin, gestured toward the slingshot with one spindly digit. "You honestly believe that thing will compete?" Daniel didn't look up. "I'm not competing with your weapons. I'm competing with your aim." Another cadet laughed. "It doesn't even have targeting assistance." "I don't need it." Because your primitive instincts are better?" Daniel finally met the speaker's eyes. "Because they're mine." He returned to checking the tension on the bands, adjusting the notch by millimeters. His fingers moved with calm, precise confidence, the kind that didn't come from theory, or design schematics, or synthetic simulation. It came from use. The testing arena was a high-vaulted chamber, walled in kinetic absorption panels. Targets hovered in lanes stationary for the first round, mobile for the second. Drones orbited above, capturing telemetry and assessing performance data in real time. One by one, the cadets stepped forward. The Lurnari launched photonic darts through 3 rotating targets, each one struck dead center. The Zirconian's magnetic coil bow split its own first shot in half with the second. An Azari cadet fired an elegant arrow of ionized gas that curved midair to track and tag every moving target across its range window. The crowd applauded. Readouts glowed with green marks of efficiency, speed, and power usage. Then Daniel Ward stepped forward. No HUD, no gloves, no sensor rig. He walked to the firing line, carrying his slingshot in one hand and the pouch of bearings in the other. "Cadet Ward," the professor said, voice smooth but sharp, "the field is calibrated for micro-projectile tracking. Your weapon lacks digital signature. The drones may not register your performance." "That's fine," Daniel said. "No energy readings will be recorded. I'm not using energy. The AI will not assist. I'm not asking it to. The professor tilted his head again. Then proceed. Daniel placed a bearing into the cradle of the rubber band, held the frame in a low, stable grip, and pulled the band back with 3 fingers. His arm straightened, his breath slowed. Then he fired. There was no sound but the faint snap of release. The bearing vanished. A moment later, the first target dropped. The entire room froze. A second bearing was already in the band. Snap. The next target dropped. A third. Snap. Target down. The telemetry drones began emitting error tones. Their systems flagged the impacts as unexpected external kinetic events. Daniel paused, lowering the slingshot. Do I need to miss one to get a score? The professor's expression didn't move. He signaled to activate the mobile targets. They appeared sleek, evasive, jittering in rapid angles, their paths unpredictable, meant to challenge reflex-based tracking systems. Daniel loaded again. Snap. One drone spiraled and crashed. Another. Snap. A second drone lost its rotor mid-flight and dropped. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch. He fired between breaths, moving like the air itself was guiding him. The final drone zigzagged to the far corner of the chamber, a golden orb, smaller than the rest. Professor Exeltor's personal assistant drone. The professor opened his mouth to intervene. Snap. The golden drone sparked, blinked, and fell. Dead center through the optical lens. Smoke curled from the core as it hit the floor. Silence. Then murmurs. Then chaos. You hit that? No lock, no lead time. Those drones are built for combat evasion. The professor stared at the wreckage of his private unit. He turned slowly to Daniel, his voice ice. You aimed for my property? Daniel shrugged. It was the only one watching me. You deliberately fired at a drone not marked for evaluation. I fired at the most difficult target available. You struck it perfectly. I didn't miss. The professor's jaw tightened. Then, finally, you intended that? Daniel didn't smile. He just stood still, the slingshot now silent in his hand. In my world, he said quietly, we learn to hit what moves, not what waits. The room said nothing, because there was nothing else to say. The next morning, the slingshot had its own entry in the Academy's incident archive. It wasn't categorized under weapons, not yet, but it sat in a curious gray zone between educational tool and hazardous mechanical implement. Professor Zeltor had filed the report himself, though the language was curiously neutral for someone whose personal drone now lay in an evidence drawer, blackened circuitry, melted lens, memory core irreparably damaged. The incident review included several odd notations. Cadet achieved high-velocity impact with zero energy assistance. Target successfully evaded AI-guided tracking in prior simulations. Kinetic analysis shows biomechanical performance exceeding expected limits for unassisted humanoid musculature. Under the final line was a single recommendation, written in Zeltor's clawed handwriting. Do not underestimate biological solutions. Daniel Ward didn't mention the drone. He didn't bring it up at breakfast in the student commissary, didn't brag about it in the corridor. If anything, he seemed quieter than usual, calmly eating his synthetic protein bar while reviewing aerodynamics data on his pad-old footage of birds, stones skipping across water, human athletes throwing javelins in Earth's early Olympic archives. A few cadets passed his table with narrowed eyes. A Varnet student even stopped mid-step just to check the pouch hanging from Ward's belt. It held only steel bearings and a cleaning cloth. No hum, no tech. Just metal and oil. Was it luck? The Varnet finally asked, voice clipped. Ward looked up. Which one? The drone. The professor's. Ward thought about it. Then, no. You didn't even use a sighting mechanism. I used my eye. Primitive, the cadet muttered, stepping away. Ward returned to his pad. He didn't look offended. He just seemed disappointed the conversation ended so soon. The real consequence of the demonstration wasn't disciplinary. It was psychological. Across campus, in training halls and cafeterias, Combat cadets who once bragged about orbital snipers and self-correcting railguns were now whispering about tension force, bearing mass, and the parabolic arc of a hand-thrown stone. The most unnerving detail was that the Academy had no real way to regulate what Ward had done. The slingshot wasn't illegal, the bearing wasn't classified as ammunition, no kinetic rules had been broken. Technically, he'd obeyed the assignment better than anyone. He'd built a ranged weapon from primitive mechanical principles. And it had punched a hole through a drone rated for frontline data combat. Worse still, he'd made it look easy. The next lecture opened in near silence. Professor Exceltor entered the room with his usual poise, but the shift in atmosphere was clear. Students no longer hovered over their shining prototypes. They watched the door instead. Ward arrived last. He wasn't late, he just waited. He walked to his seat, slingshot holstered at his belt, bearing pouch sealed tight. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. Zeltor stepped to the center of the classroom dais and activated the hollow projector. Today's topic, he said, voice flat, is trajectory under non-assisted systems. No one moved. Let us begin with a practical question. Who here believes they could outshoot Cadet Ward? The room held its breath. No one raised a hand. Zeltor's gaze swept the room. No one? Not even those of you with stabilized recoil mounts or neural feedback gloves? A few students shifted, uncomfortable. Fascinating, he said. Let me ask a different question. How many of you tested your weapons against unpredictable targets? A few hands rose, tentatively. Zeltor nodded. And how many hit moving objects without algorithmic correction? Most hands dropped. He turned to Ward. Cadet, may we borrow your weapon? Ward paused, then unhooked the slingshot and handed it over without hesitation. Zeltor held it with 2 fingers delicately, like it might explode. A piece of elastic, a wooden fork, steel pellets, this is what bested our drones. He turned slowly, holding it up for the class. And why? No one answered. Because it isn't just about force, Zeltor said, or guidance, or precision. It's about interface. He set the slingshot on the table. This weapon does not assist its user, it demands something in return. Muscle memory, coordination, emotional regulation. He looked directly at Ward. Instinct. After class, students began showing up to the outdoor practice range, not with their assignments, but with strips of elastic, makeshift frames, and objects scavenged from the engineering disposal bins. Ward didn't speak unless asked, but he never walked away when they approached. He showed them how to anchor the band, how to brace their hands without shaking, how to pull not with force but with rhythm. The first time someone hit a moving target with a basic slingshot, they whooped so loud it triggered the campus alert system. The second time, no one laughed. They just nodded, as if realizing the truth in their bones. That weekend, Zeltor hosted an impromptu faculty demonstration. Combat instructors from 3 other departments attended, most of them, expecting to see the infamous human attempt, a long-range shot in controlled conditions. Instead, Ward handed each instructor a slingshot and said, "Try." One by one, they failed. Most missed. Some dropped their bearings mid-load. One nearly hit a ventilation pipe. Zeltor simply watched. When the last instructor returned the slingshot in frustrated silence, Ward stepped up, loaded a bearing, and asked calmly, "Permission to aim?" Zeltor didn't nod. He just stepped aside. The drone hovered at the far end of the range, placed deliberately behind 2 obstructions tall shields, with shifting reflective surfaces. Ward didn't use the optics. He didn't move into position. He just closed one eye, breathed once, and fired. The bearing bounced off one shield, curved midair, not from any guidance system, but from spin, and struck the drone on its rear sensor port. The crowd didn't clap. They stood still. One instructor finally muttered, "He's bending physics." Zeltor corrected him softly. "He's obeying it more closely than we ever have." The following week, a bulletin went out from the Academy board. Effective immediately, ranged weapons assignments must now include analysis of manual dexterity, biomechanical feedback, and trajectory prediction using analog systems. One note followed, small and unassuming. All high-energy prototypes are to be tested alongside at least one zero-tech counterpart. For comparison, it didn't mention Ward. It didn't have to. He sat alone that evening, back at the range, polishing the slingshot under the fading light of the simulated sun. He didn't look proud, just focused, as if he knew this would happen. As if he was waiting for someone to ask the question none of them had dared yet. Zeltor approached quietly. You knew that drone would try to evade. Yes. You knew your shot would reach it. I knew I could try. You adjusted mid-arc, using nothing but spin? Ward looked up. Sir, humans have been skipping stones since before we had fire. Zeltor looked at him, and for the first time since the start of the term, he smiled. Thin, sharp, respectful. Cadet, he said. You've reminded us of something important. What's that? That we didn't build civilization because we mastered machines. Ward raised an eyebrow. We built it because we learned how to aim. 2 days after the slingshot demonstration upended the Academy's primitive weapons curriculum, the Board of Applied Combat Science received an anonymous proposal requesting authorization to observe Cadet Ward under structured performance conditions. Objective: to assess the limits of unassisted human targeting instincts under escalating stress environments. Requesting use of variable pressure, Chamber 3, and full kinetic sensor suite. It was signed not by a staff member, but by Professor Zeltor himself. The approval came through in less than a day. They prepped the chamber under standard safety protocols: adjustable gravity plates, variable wind resistance, ambient noise injectors, and no AI stabilization. It was a sealed room, not much larger than a cargo container, with matte gray walls and soft lighting designed to eliminate reflections. At the far end stood 3 kinetic targets, each about the size of a fist, suspended at different heights. They would move independently, accelerating at irregular intervals, mimicking the erratic behavior of organic prey or failing drones. The room's central camera focused on the human inside. Daniel stood quietly with the slingshot in hand. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbow, his knuckles already red from testing band tension during warm-up. Professor Zeltor and a dozen specialists stood behind the observation glass, most of them silent. A motion specialist whispered, "No sensors, not even a wrist gauge." "Nothing but grip," another murmured. "That frame's made of sapwood." "And a rubber band," someone added. "A strip of repurposed tire polymer," Zeltor corrected. Inside the chamber, Daniel adjusted his footing, exhaled, and gave a short nod toward the ceiling camera. The test began. At first, the conditions were neutral. Daniel loaded a bearing, pulled back, and fired. A clean strike, the first target snapped backward, caught mid-drift. The second appeared. He adjusted by a fraction of a degree, fired again. Hit. Third. Hit. The observers logged the data quietly. Reaction time, consistent. Accuracy, surgical. Grip pressure variance, negligible. Then, the gravity shifted. From Earth normal to half, then a sudden spike to 1.7. Most cadets would have staggered. Daniel's stance changed slightly. His draw arm dropped by a centimeter, but the bearing still flew straight. Target down. Next came the wind-simulated cross-gusts blasted from the chamber walls. Daniel squinted once, lifted the bearing slightly higher, and adjusted his angle. The bearing curved mid-flight, riding the airflow. Hit. The murmuring behind the glass grew louder. He's calculating that without assistance. Eyeballing. Eyeballing. No, he's feeling it. Zeltor did not speak. He simply watched. The lights dropped. Then, strobe flashes ignited randomized brightness surges meant to scramble visual processing. It was a cruel setting. Even sensor-locked drones struggled under strobe response conditions. Daniel blinked slowly between pulses, syncing with the gaps. He waited for rhythm, found it, and launched. A metallic chime. Another impact. The final setting activated. Full simulation. All variables at once: gravity flux, wind interference, light disruption, noise injection. The room screamed with imbalance. Most soldiers would need neuro assist just to track a moving target. Daniel loaded one more bearing. This time, he closed his eyes. Held his breath. pulled back, released. The bearing sliced through space with a sharp hiss and struck the last target clean through its center. It spun wildly, broke loose from its anchor, and clattered to the floor. Silence. In the control room, no one moved. Finally, the AI system that had been quietly tracking impact velocity whispered its findings into the chamber logs. Projectile path, non-linear, adjusted mid-flight via spin manipulation, impact velocity, 94 meters per second, error margin, 1.4 millimeters. Professor Exceltor exhaled slowly and turned to the room. Close the file, that's all we need. That evening, Daniel didn't return to his dorm. He walked instead to the outer edge of the Academy's training compound, where the atmosphere shields opened into the long red dusk of the simulated Martian plain. A thin layer of dust blew low across the ground, and the air smelled faintly of iron and synthetic polymers. He sat on the edge of a storage crate and began cleaning the slingshot. Not as ritual, as necessity. The rubber band had begun to fray a faint split along one side. Nothing dangerous yet, but it would affect balance. He pulled a replacement strip from his pouch and carefully looped it through the frame, checking tension with a slow pull. "Is that your ritual?" a voice asked. He didn't look up. "No, it's maintenance." Professor Exceltor stepped into the open without preamble. "You broke 3 sensor thresholds and an observational model we've used for 15 years. Daniel shrugged. "I hit what I aimed at." Zeltor watched him quietly. "You should know," he said after a pause. "The Council has started re-evaluating kinetic weapon studies. They want a new training module, unassisted targeting, non-powered impact physics. Sounds overdue. Your method terrifies them." Daniel looked up. "Because it doesn't require permission?" Zeltor didn't answer. Instead, he knelt, folded his insectoid limbs into a shape almost like seated human posture. "Where did you learn that kind of control?" Daniel looked past him, toward the low horizon. "When I was 12, he said, "I couldn't afford ammo. My dad taught me to shoot with ball bearings and rusted nails, tin cans, tree bark, then squirrels, then distance shots. That doesn't explain your control under simulated combat." "Combat simulation?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You ever had to hunt your dinner before sunset? That's a simulation." Zeltor nodded slowly. "Instinct," he said. Daniel shook his head. "Not instinct. Training. Instinct's what happens before you know better. What I did was learned, repeated, trusted." He twanged the new band. "Once. You teach weapons here like they're smart, but ours never needed to be." Zeltor tapped his fingers together. "So, then what is your weapon?" Daniel's voice was calm. "Proof that the hand still matters." By the end of the week, word of the test had spread far beyond the campus. 2 independent academies requested access to the chamber footage. The Interstellar Combat Science Journal issued an inquiry about publishing the data logs, and the Defense Advisory Board asked for an interview not with Daniel, but with his instructors. They wanted to know what made a slingshot outperform modern arms. The answer, Zeltor told them, was simple. The tool didn't outperform, the hand did. And behind the closed doors of the council chambers, they began drafting the first amendment to combat training in decades. All cadets must demonstrate manual targeting ability using non-assisted kinetic devices. In the margin of the proposed draft, someone had written, "Start with rocks." The first injury came quietly. Not on the practice field, not during a test in the Commons courtyard. A first-year cadet from Hydrak Prime had been experimenting with an unbalanced slingshot replica made from recycled flex polymer tubing and a drone stabilizer arm. She missed her target by 3 meters. The stone ricocheted off a wall and struck her left temple. No skull fracture, but a visible hematoma formed within minutes. The Academy medics responded quickly, diagnosing a mild concussion and releasing her after 24 hours of observation, with strict instructions for 2 weeks of rest and 0 ranged exercises. The moment the report reached Professor Zeltor, he knew exactly what had happened. The cadets were copying Daniel Ward. But they were skipping everything that mattered. Ward wasn't in the courtyard that day. He'd been scheduled for an off-campus assessment with the Special Applications Group, a visit originally meant for demonstration, not training. But by the time the team had finished recording his live fire exercises, the goalposts had shifted. They asked him to stay. He declined. When he returned that evening, he was met outside his dorm by Professor Exeltor. No pleasantries. "You've started a trend," the instructor said flatly. Ward blinked. "I didn't give a lecture." "You didn't need to. Half the cadets are building slingshots now. Improvised, unsupervised. Your method is being replicated without your control." Ward exhaled through his nose. "And someone got hurt." "Correct." Ward nodded, jaw tight. "Show me the injury report." Zeltor handed him a data tablet. Ward read it carefully, eyes narrowing at the imaging scans. "She braced wrong," he said. "Pulled from the wrist instead of the shoulder. Released off angle. Her posture was too high." Zeltor watched him. "You're not surprised. I've been saying this isn't a toy." They saw the result, not the practice. "And what would you suggest?" Ward handed the tablet back. "Stop calling it primitive. That's where the problem started." The next morning, the academy made an announcement. All unassisted kinetic weapons training must be conducted under supervision. New elective course opening: manual ballistics and analog targeting. It filled within 20 minutes. Ward didn't volunteer to teach it, but his name was listed on the syllabus as the technique originator, and that was enough. The first class gathered on the lower training range, under open sky, with wooden targets lined up at staggered intervals. Ward stood silently near the center, Slingshot at his side. He wasn't introduced. He just began. "You think this is about strength," he said. "It's not. It's about timing." He picked up a training slingshot, one of the standard issue units the academy had replicated based on his design. He handed it to the nearest cadet. "Draw." She pulled the band back. The frame shook in her hand. "Where are you pulling from?" he asked. "My arm." "Wrong. Pull from your back. Breathe. Shoulders down." She adjusted. The tremble eased. He stepped back. "Now aim. Not with your eyes. With the space between blinks." Several cadets looked confused. One raised a hand. "What does that mean?" Ward pointed to the next target. "Try. You'll figure it out." They did. Misses came first, dozens of them. Bearings hit dirt, ricocheted off trees, bounced off protective panels. But slowly, posture changed, stance improved. A few started to land glancing blows. Then, a direct strike. Another. Ward didn't celebrate. He just nodded. When the first cadet hit 2 in a row, she looked to him with excitement. He simply said, "Now, do it without thinking." The course gained a nickname among the cadets, the invisible trigger. Because no one could quite describe how the shot happened. They just knew that one moment they were holding a bearing, and the next, the world had narrowed into a straight line, not made of sight, but of certainty. That's when the bearing left their hand. And that's when it hit. Late one evening, after the last training session had wrapped, Professor Zeltor found Daniel Ward sitting in the now empty range, polishing the original slingshot under moonlight. It looked older now, the wood worn smooth by use, the band slightly darker from sweat and oil. "You still use the same frame?" Exeltor asked. Ward nodded. "I tried making a better one, lighter wood, polymer notches. It didn't feel right." "Why?" Ward shrugged. "This one listened." Zeltor tilted his head. "Explain." "It's not just about what the weapon does, it's about what it asks from you. Balance, patience, pressure. If it doesn't ask for anything, it's not worth holding." The professor sat beside him. "I've been teaching for 70 years, he said. "I've studied gravity weapons, neural-damped launchers, smart rounds, and in all that time, I've never seen a room go silent after a shot until yours." Ward smiled faintly. "Because it wasn't the weapon that made the silence." "No," Zeltor agreed. "It was the reminder." They sat in companionable quiet for a moment. Then Zeltor asked, "Do you miss real projectiles on your world?" Ward looked up at the stars, simulated, but familiar enough. "We never lost them, just stopped calling them weapons." "What do you call them now?" He smiled. "Tools, games, sometimes warnings." The next day, another drone went down. Not during a test. During a live training exercise in the upper tiers, where high-level cadets practiced with inertial platforms and airborne evasive units, the drone had broken protocol and veered too close to the observation deck. Its proximity triggered an automatic threat designation. A cadet flinched. Ward saw it happen from the opposite field. He was too far to run, but not too far to aim. The shot took 3 seconds. Snap. The bearing flew clean through the outer stabilizer ring of the drone, spinning it off course just enough to drop its threat flag and reroute its trajectory. No one was hurt. The security officer on duty submitted a report. The drone's course review noted a single line. Collision avoided by manual projectile. Time to impact calculated at 1.2 seconds. Impact originated from outside assigned safe zone. Origin: Human Cadet Ward. The following week, the Combat Science Board officially recognized the Slingshot not as a curiosity, but as a certified emergency response tool. It was added to the auxiliary carry loadout for field cadets. There were conditions: limited use, design restrictions, must be handmade, no auto assist. One clause stood out. This tool may only be issued to cadets who pass the stillness aptitude test. The board didn't explain what that meant, but everyone on campus already knew, because they'd watched the man who passed it every time he pulled back the band. And they remembered that for all the tech in the galaxy, nothing moved faster than a hand that knew when to let go. The final test was unannounced. No dates, no rosters, no warning. One moment, it was another quiet morning at the Galactic Academy of Applied Combat Science. The next, every senior cadet received a single-line message through their secure comms channel. Report to Observation Hall Delta. Bring your issued analog tool. No substitutions. Daniel Ward read the message once, closed his locker, and clipped his slingshot to his belt. He didn't ask questions. He knew what was coming. Not because anyone had told him. Because after all the lectures, the tests, the mimicry and revisions, there was still one lesson left to give. And the Academy was finally ready to hear it. Observation. Hall Delta wasn't a training room. It was where evaluations happened, where cadets sat behind blast-proof glass and watched war simulations, where instructors dissected failure and survival frame by frame. Now, for the first time, it wasn't a place for watching. It was a stage. The cadets filed in, weapons slung over shoulders or strapped to thighs. Some carried slingshots, nearly identical to Daniel's. Others had modded versions, different materials, curved grips, specialized cradles for shaped shot. Most were copies. One or two might have improved on the original. Daniel sat in the second row, hands folded over his knees. At the front stood Professor Zeltor, his pale limbs folded with ceremonial stillness. "Today," he said, "you will not fire to hit." The room rustled. Cadets looked at one another. "You will fire to miss." That got their attention. "Not to err," Zeltor clarified. "Not to fall short. You will miss intentionally, by a margin of exactly 5 centimeters. Now, there were murmurs. "You may not use measurement tools. You may not fire twice. Each of you will step forward once. Load your bearing, draw, release, miss." He gestured toward the far wall. A small target hovered in the center of a matte backdrop, glowing softly. "Miss by the width of a finger," he said. "No more, no less." One cadet raised a hand. "Sir, what's the objective?" Zeltor's voice didn't waver. "To prove you've learned control." One by one, they stepped forward. The first cadet fired too cautiously. The bearing dipped wide and low, easily 15 centimeters off. The next overshot. The third hesitated, trying to calculate by eye, and released too late. The bearing skimmed the edge of the target, triggering a buzz from the accuracy alert system. Fail. Fail. Close. Too close. Fail. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stepped to the line. No flex, no pretense. He placed a bearing in the pouch, pulled back the band, and stopped breathing. The room went still with him. He aimed. But not at the target. 5 centimeters left. He let go. The bearing flew straight, clean, and clipped the air beside the target's edge so close that the atmospheric sensors registered the pressure wave, but the motion tracking labeled it missed perfectly. A green light blinked once above the target. Success. The room exhaled. After the test, Zeltor dismissed the others. They filtered out slowly, whispering among themselves. The buzz was different this time. Not excitement, not gossip. Respect. It wasn't about hitting anymore. It was about how much you chose not to. Daniel stayed behind. He knew the professor would speak. He didn't expect the question. Why did you fire left? Daniel looked up. The wind. There's no wind in the hall. There was when I stepped in. Zeltor paused. You adjusted for ambient memory? I adjusted for instinct, Daniel said. It tells me more than numbers do. Zeltor nodded slowly. Then he reached into the folds of his robe and removed something wrapped in cloth. He set it on the bench beside Daniel and stepped back. Daniel unwrapped it carefully. It was a slingshot. Not his. Different. The frame was made of hardened carbon root not native to Earth, but native to Zeltor's own world. The bands were translucent, humming faintly, not with energy, but with tightly packed organic tension. Handmade, balanced. Daniel lifted it in silence, turning it over. He could feel it, the weight distribution, the tension curve. It had been made by someone who understood the same things he did. Someone who had listened to the tool before trying to master it. Zeltor spoke softly. Before I ever studied pulse throwers, before I joined the academy, I hunted with one of these. My species used them for generations. We called them sarnak, sky bows. Daniel didn't speak. Zeltor's gaze settled on him. I forgot what they felt like, until you reminded me. Daniel set the weapon gently back in its cloth. I didn't come here to teach, he said. You didn't, Zeltor replied, but you did anyway. In the weeks that followed, the Academy implemented sweeping changes to its training standards. Digital targeting drills were reduced. Muscle memory testing increased. The stillness aptitude test became mandatory for all second-year combat cadets, not just for slingshots, for everything. Because the lesson had stuck. Precision wasn't about machinery. It was about a moment, the breath between motion and release, the line between knowing and guessing. Cadets started spending more time at the analog range than the VR chamber, not because they needed to, because they wanted to. To feel it. The band pull. The stillness. The shot. Daniel Ward graduated with no honors. He didn't need them. He left the academy with his slingshot, a carbon root sarnak wrapped in cloth, and a new regulation named unofficially in his memory. Ward's Law. If it moves, aim ahead. If it breathes, aim narrow. If it watches, aim back. When asked years later why he chose a slingshot, of all things, he answered with only one line. Because it always knew when to let go, and so did I. And in the archives of the galaxy's most advanced combat school, under the curriculum for primitive ranged weaponry, the first listed entry remained. Tool. Name, slingshot. Energy source, none. Assist systems, none. Danger rating, situationally lethal. Recommended use, when instinct matters more than code. Cadet of origin, Ward. Daniel, human. Note: don't underestimate the hand, it remembers more than machines ever will.